Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. My name is Carey Newhoff. I'm joined by Barna's Savannah Kimberlin. Savannah, welcome, and welcome to all the leaders who are joining us today too. Hey, we are still early-ish on in a new year, and some of you may be new to the podcast, but our goal here is to bring you some of the latest data on the crisis that we're all navigating, which never seems to end, and also some of the top leaders. And today, we're going to welcome Jeanne Stevens in a few minutes from Soul City Church in Chicago. But we're learning some things about priorities and how priorities are changing during the pandemic. So you've got some fresh data for us, Savannah, from Barna. What did you discover?
Yeah, I do. So we know that so much has changed in 2020 and now into 2021, so much is changing, right? So we wanted to capture that and really see how much is changing, and if pastors are in fact changing things like their church programs or their calendar, things like that. And so we asked specifically to Protestant pastors in January 2021, have your ministry priorities as a church changed in the last year? And 70% of Protestant pastors say yes to some degree. So much is changing. And our data shows that primarily for non-white congregations, pastors of non-white congregations, they're experiencing the most change, with about 1 in 4 saying that major changes are happening in their church right now in response to the pandemic.
And any idea, any insight into what those changes are, Savannah? Like what are they used to value? What's changing and all that?
Yeah. I mean, I think more pastors just in general are embracing that innovative spirit, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about ministry priorities shifting, pastors finding unique ways to prioritize discipleship and perhaps community engagement. We're seeing that that's the top of the list of ways that pastors are innovating and things that they're prioritizing where perhaps they weren't before. So lots, I would say, what is changing? Probably everything, Carey.
Yeah. And all the data, if you want to get a little more on this, you can go to barnaaccess.com. I would say if you have the same exact strategy you had a year and a half ago, you're probably in trouble. Maybe you're not even listening anymore. I mean, it has totally transformed. I get things like the Bible, introducing people to Jesus and the mission of the church. That doesn't change, but the methods obviously have been disrupted greatly. And moving forward, we're moving into a new world. Now, one of the unique dynamics that Jeanne has is she co-leads Soul City Church with her husband, Jarrett. And the pandemic has been hard on marriages. My wife, Tony, just released a book for couples called Before You Split. You look at the data. I mean, there's really disturbing stuff in the news, at least in my country, in Canada, about child abuse being up over the last year. And it's been so hard. And a few months ago, we asked pastors how things were going at home. And what did we discover? Good news, troubling news? What are we seeing in the church?
Yeah. So we asked Protestant pastors in September of 2020, how satisfied are you with your relationship in the middle of a pandemic? So how's your spousal relationship going? And it's interesting because while we only have about 1 in 10 admitting that things aren't great, only 58% of pastors said excellent. So the rest of the leaders really kind of fell in the middle of the road. And I think if I were to put on my David Kinnaman hat and interpret this data point, I would say we probably can only really trust the pastors who say excellent. Because if you're saying, it's good, then you're probably not flourishing in that relationship. So I think it's safe to say that only about 6 in 10 Protestant pastors say that they're really satisfied and doing well with their spouse right now during the pandemic.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for David, but David might also say, because I've heard him say it numerous times, that we tend to be a little bit optimistic sometimes in our assessment of things, which is a strength, but sometimes a weakness. The other thing I would say to leaders too, and this is, Tony, my wife and I, we've had quite a journey in this, and we talk about it publicly in her book, but there would have been times in our relationship where I said things were excellent and she would say, not so fast. And my good friend, Jeff Henderson, has a great question that I wish I'd never heard, but his question is, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And that would be a fun question to ask your family when you go home today. Hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And then just listen. And sometimes I haven't really enjoyed hearing the answer to that question, Savannah. It's not been that great. So Okay, that's really helpful. Well, thank you. We have a lot more data for you for free. And then there's obviously premium access as well over at barnaaccess.com. And maybe with all that said, let's dive into my conversation with Jeanne Stevens. Jeanne, welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's good to be with you today.
It's so good to be with you, my friend.
Yeah. So, man, here we are. We were talking before we started recording, like we're almost a year into this, and you've been through so much personally, a few deaths in your immediate family, your husband Jarrett's brother and father. You've been through almost a year. Both of our churches, right, haven't been open for gathered in-person worship in almost a year. What are the biggest changes that you think you have felt in this year of ministry? I remember, okay, I got to tell listeners this because we've known each other for a while, but I remember, and I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, otherwise we'll cut this out. Okay? But wasn't it you when you finally became a lead pastor a few years ago who felt like you needed to write a letter of apology to all the lead pastors out there saying, when I was criticizing you from the back row, I had no idea.
Yep, that was me. And there's this reality that until you sit in the actual seat, you have no idea what that leader truly absorbs. And so I just did a general, I'm sorry. I didn't realize all that you experienced in this position. And that was me. Good memory, Carey.
Yeah, that's funny because that was a few years ago now. So because this is good. We got a lot of young leaders who are leading for the first time, but just going back to that moment, what were a couple of the aha moments that you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. Like, what were some of those initially? And then we'll talk about what shocked you now, years into this journey.
Yeah, I love that question. I think that until you sit in the seat of holding all of the leadership, and when you hold the mantle, if you will, of sitting in the seat of a lead pastor, you don't realize the weight of decision-making fatigue that sits on a lead pastor's shoulders. And it's not just the decisions that people see, experience, and feel. It's all the decisions that you're holding back even. That you get a sense, I don't think this is right to let this through and for people to absorb this. And it's holding the weight of all of the spiritual stories of the people in your congregation. And, people that are experiencing loss, and, people that are walking through a divorce, and, people that are really struggling financially. And so you're holding all of that at the same time. And then you're trying to balance being in the present moment and what people need at the same time of casting vision for where you want to see them go. And not everybody moves towards vision at the same rate and speed. And so how do you create momentum so that you can journey as a community, you can journey as a church, but that you have people all over the spiritual spectrum, or at least we do. And so I just remember as a young leader, and I spent 11 years at Willow Creek. I spent 4 years at North Point, learned so much in those 15 years. So grateful for my heritage. But I remember as a young leader, and Carey, you and I joke about this because we're both 8s on the Enneagram, thinking like, well, can't you make that decision faster?
Right.
Or can't you give us a little bit more insight as to why we're doing that? Or, why did you give more money to this ministry versus to that ministry? And now sitting in this seat and holding all of that, I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of empathy. I have a lot of compassion. And it's a heavy weight that lead pastors sit in. So those are a few things off the top of my head.
So those were all the things already. And then the world melted down. And
Yes.
and it added a whole other level of chaos and uncertainty.
Yeah, I wish I could have seen a leader lead through a pandemic, right? I had to do it on the fly along with everybody else.
Yeah. So what would you say for you, because you haven't been able to regather in person now for the better part of a year, what have been some of the unique challenges and maybe the surprises that you've seen in Chicago?
Yeah. being 11 months in, and it's hard to believe that we are nearing a year. I'm not sure when this
Mhm.
podcast is going to come out.
Mhm.
And I just did a training with our team, and I kind of look back over the 11 months, and I talked about how we have walked through, at this point, 4 unique phases as a church. The
Mm.
first phase was that immediate reaction, in
Right.
March of 2020. And it was just immediate reaction. What are we going to do? How are we going to shut down? How are we going to pivot? Who's going to do what? Throw out all the job descriptions. Everybody's got a new role, and so that was immediate reaction. And that really went from about March till probably June. We were
Mhm.
doing a lot of reaction work. And then I would say we pivoted into another phase, which was interim response. And we really realized, okay, COVID is here to stay.
Right.
This is not lifting anytime soon. So how do we move out of reaction and become more responsive? And so we created, some interim response. And I would say that was through the summer for us. And there was a lot of interim response as well, due to what was happening in our city, what was happening around the world with the racial reckoning that was occurring. And so,
Mhm.
how were we responding to that in light of also COVID? So that was phase 2. Phase 3 was an intentional reimagining.
Hmm.
And I believe we really started moving into that, August up to where we are now. And we're just beginning the conversations around what an interdependent reopening would be. So I don't know if you caught all the alliteration, the I's and the R's. Immediate reaction, interim response, intentional reimagining, interdependent reopening. But
And all the
we've
lead
walked.
pastors are smiling. Mhm.
They can all steal it. You know, we've walked through all of those, and each one of
Yeah.
those phases has required different leadership. It's required a different level of showing up as a team, as a leader for our congregation. So many changes occurring in each one of those phases.
It's an interesting phrase or metaphor, the interdependent reopening. Did I get
Hmm.
that right? What's
Yeah, you
underneath
got it
that?
right.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I just was sharing with our team, in the very beginning, I stole an old phrase from Andy Stanley, who I just love so dearly, and I'm so grateful for the pastor he was in my life and the pastor he still is in my life. But he used to always say, "Marry the mission, date the strategy."
Mhm.
And I used that phrase at the very beginning of COVID. Listen, the mission of Soul City is alive and well. We have not shut down. The building may not be open the same way that it was open, but the church is alive and well. And so, what we need to do is we need to break up with the strategy of being just a come and see kind of church and really lean into the calling of being a go and be church. And, so for us, as I think about reopening, this phrase interdependent reopening, it's an opportunity for us to surrender to one another, to surrender to God, to work as a team in a way that maybe we weren't always working as a team. We have a couple thousand people that used to come here every single weekend. And so, people are all over the place on a Sunday, and
Mhm.
over the last 11 months, it has forced new levels of teamwork. It's forced new levels of surrendering to one another. That the kids ministry is working with the production ministry in a way that they've never done
Yeah.
before, and that's really revealed some great things. The flexibility that has come out of this is so positive. And so I just said to my team today, I want us to be able to say we were interdependent on God and interdependent on one another. And when
Hmm.
we had wins, we all felt the wins. And when we had losses, we all felt the losses, versus the siloed effect, right?
Right. Oh yeah. So where you're just kind of doing your own thing, head down, and yeah, there
Hmm.
was that person over there in that department. That's
Yeah.
an interesting metaphor.
Yeah.
So it's been a very discouraging year for a lot of
Hmm.
leaders, and
Yeah.
we can talk about what's been discouraging, but I would like to know, as we sit here now at almost the year mark, what is there anything encouraging? Like you
Mm.
hinted at it a little bit.
Yep.
Like there's
Hmm.
there's some new resiliency
Yeah.
there. There's some interdependence. Like
Yep.
what are the silver linings? What are the like?
Yeah.
This is a reimagining of Soul City
Yeah.
that you're going through right now.
I love that question because it's a question of trusting that God is always at work. And it's not just finding a silver lining for silver lining's sake, but it's really looking and saying, where is Holy Spirit at work in all of this? Because God hasn't just like checked out, where do we see
Didn't shock him. He's not like
right? Where do
surprised.
we see movements of God? And I would say there has been a spirit of innovation in the church like never before. And I love seeing that in our church. I love seeing that in the global church. People have had to innovate, and I love that. We're reaching people that we would have never reached before.
What has innovation looked like for you guys? Because that is a
Yeah.
question that has been hard to answer. Honestly, I get that message all the time, and I ask leaders, and they're like, well, there's been a lot of adaptation, but not a lot of innovation yet. And I certainly hope that is to come. So what is that looking like for you?
I can give you a few examples. The one that comes to the top of my mind is, and I'm sure a lot of the leaders and pastors that are listening had this same experience. In the beginning, everybody was like, okay, I can watch church online. This is good, and everybody's looking at their numbers and they're like, wow, there's more people than ever watching our services. And then screen fatigue, and then Zoom fatigue, and then I don't want to go to church online anymore. And then, wow, like the rest of the world, I'm realizing Sunday's a great morning to sleep in, and so or I'll watch it at another time, whatever. And so we really saw that. And so we did a thing, and it was a part of our interim response, where we launched this thing called Church Refresh. And we moved our services into a 30-minute window. And then what we did was almost like a choose your own adventure. We created all kinds of resources that people could then go and choose post the service. So the service looked like, a 30-minute encounter. There was worship. We went right into a message. Perhaps we shared, a prayer or something that people could engage in. Maybe told them about something that was going on at Soul City that they could connect to. And then we said, if you're looking for more worship, we've put up a 30-minute worship set on our page. Go to Church Refresh. If you're looking for a deeper dive on this teaching, we've got a 45-minute extra teach on this. If you're looking for some questions to talk about with your family right now, go to this page. And so it was a way to combat that screen fatigue and to innovate on our service. And the fun thing about that, Carey, is outside of the pandemic, I don't know if a lot of church leaders, if a pandemic never happened, if they would say, you know what, we're going to go to a 30-minute service. We just think this is the best thing to do. I think
or to give people choice.
Or to give people choice. We get locked into our 60-minute planning center and beyond. We get locked into our 30-minute message and beyond. We get locked into, it's got to be 3 worship songs and 1 at the end. There's got to be a close, or whatever your thing is, right? We all kind of get locked into our way of doing things. And the pandemic forced us to go, okay, what do we want to do for a service? People are not coming to this building. How can we recreate it? And one of the fun things that we did to innovate, we had this little ticker that ran across the bottom of the screen. And so it literally would kind of say worship, and the ticker, as soon as worship was done, it would move to a message. And then the message would go through in the ticker. So people literally knew the message is almost over. You could see the ticker coming to the last few minutes. And people kind of really connected to the ability to have a sense of, I know where things are going, and I know what amount of time I'm going to give to this, and what I want to give more to, I have choice. So that was one of the ways that we innovated, and people really loved it.
You may not have a ready answer to this question, but I got to ask. So when you give people options like worship, message, or, an in-depth discussion with your family, any idea on how that audience divided itself? Was it a third, a third, a third? Was it, what did you see?
There was all and those weren't the only options, but people really were drawn to worship. I think people deeply miss worshiping with one another. And so to be able to have an experience where they can connect to worship. So a lot of people went there. Our more fully transformed followers of Jesus, people that have been tracking for a long time, our coaches, our small group leaders, they were really drawn into the extra study. They were really drawn into the discussion questions. They were drawn into the deeper dive, on whatever it was that we were preaching on that weekend. And so, it really showed us also the types of people that were in our church and what it was that they were hungry for.
This may be premature, but when you're able to regather, do you think you'll keep some of those innovations, or will you have like the in-person stream, then the online stream, or any thoughts about what Soul City Church moving forward is going to look like regathered?
Yeah, well, I think that like most every church leader that is listening is the awareness that there is a whole group of people that now attend Soul City Church that have never walked through the doors of Soul City Church. There is a whole group of people that probably will never walk through the doors of Soul City Church.
Yes.
They don't even live here, but this is their home. And I had a guy email me this last week. Actually, he had sent in some resources to the church and just sent us a letter saying, "I'm so grateful for this teaching that you did." And he lives in California. And so I found his email and emailed him and said, "How did you even find our church? Like, I want to know." And a friend of a friend of a friend, and he considers himself a part of Soul City Church. So one of the things that I would say right away is that we will not view our live stream as a second thing that's out there. We will always view our live stream as this is a way to communicate with those that attend Soul City Church. And we will put the same level of excellence, the same level of innovation, the same level of creativity into what people are watching at home, because that may be how they always attend Soul City Church. So that's one thing as we look to interdependently reopen. And I want to add a little thing on this. I'm working very hard to not use the word return. It's been very important to me to not cast a vision to our people. We're returning, because in many ways that just sounds like we're going to go back to what Soul City was. And Soul City is not that Soul City anymore. We've walked through a pandemic together. We've walked through a radical change in our world together. So while we may be reopening, I want to prepare our people for the reality that we are reopening the doors of the church, but we're not going to just return to what was. God's been doing stuff in each of us. And so, while God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, he's a God that is new, right? I mean, he's always doing new things. And so are we willing to do new things with how we reach people? It's not, that passage isn't about old wine and old wineskins. It's about new wine and new wineskins. And that's one of my deep prayers for our church and for the global church, that we would be willing to really step into the new wine and the new wineskin.
It's such a great articulation of that, Jeannie, and I'm so glad you raised that. It was funny. I was looking at what's happening at Connexus, and obviously I'm not the lead pastor anymore, but still very much involved and do a bit of coaching and that kind of thing. But I was looking at our numbers from yesterday. We're recording this obviously on a Monday, and it's like 3 to 4x our normal adult attendance just on the YouTube views without a multiplier. And I'm like, I don't know who those people are. We're doing our best to collect data, but this ship has sailed. It is not, it is not March 2020 anymore. There is a new church that has formed, and we don't really know what it's like. And my successor, Jeff Brody, he talks about relaunching Connexus, not reopening Connexus, when we finally have that opportunity. And you're in a very similar vein. Are you kind of glad you either haven't had the opportunity or have not taken the opportunity to regather in person yet? Like, do you think that's bought you more time, or do you like, oh, Carey, no, I wish we were all back in the building 6 months ago. Come on, give me a break. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that I have not had to pour my energy into starts and stops. Lots of energy has come out of leaders over the last 11 months. Like a sponge, we have been wrung and wrung and wrung, and then wrung some more. And so I'm grateful that we didn't start into a strategy that required a start, and then a stop, a start, and then a stop. And I have friends that have, and they've had lots of learning in that, and lots of growth in that. And I have no judgment on it. It was the strategy that was best for their church. For us, I'm grateful that our people have been able to consistently depend on, here is what we are going to do. And in the very beginning, I said to them, we are going to reopen in phases when it is appropriate to do so. And our goal is to reopen so that everyone can come together, not so that only singles can come to our church. And if you have kids, you got to keep watching from home, or only a certain age demographic, and those over 65, you can't come. And so, our reopening, our relaunching will of course include social distancing. It will include masks. I think that's here to stay for quite some time, at least in my area of the country. There may be other places where it's not. In our area of Chicagoland,
downtown Chicago, right?
Downtown Chicago. This is a firm mask wearing, socially distanced area. And so when we do relaunch, when we do reopen, we'll reopen with those realities. But I want to be able to have everybody make the choice. I feel safe coming. And I'm a mom that's single, and I've got 2 kids, and there's something for me and for my kids. Or I'm an older person and I feel safe coming, and there's something for me to be able to come. So I think that has been part of our decision making, and I'm grateful that my energy was not drained out in starts and stops. My energy was spent in trying to innovate and reimagine who we would be as a church.
It's been such a rich conversation already. Any other thoughts on how you think church will be different moving forward? We're not in this interim period anymore. Things are reopened. People are functioning. We're shopping again. We're eating in restaurants again, with masks, without masks, whatever. But we're in the post-pandemic era. Any other thoughts on how church will be different for you?
Yeah, one of the questions that and we may end up getting there, that you had sent to me beforehand, was, how do you cast vision in the midst of a crisis? How do you cast vision in the midst of an unknown future? And I loved that question, and even this one that you've posed of how things are going to be different. And I just was taken back to Proverbs 29:18, where there's no vision, the people perish. And my hope and my prayer is that church leaders will not stop casting vision for people to find and follow Jesus, but to let go of perhaps some of the old methods that we used to use. You look through church history, we are not doing what we once did. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the church always reinvents itself. And I believe we're in one of those moments, and vision is critical. People need vision. They need hope. One of the things that I would say I'm discouraged about is that the already spiritual drift that existed in the church, I believe, got accelerated in COVID.
So you think the people who are drifting, they're just like off in the ocean somewhere now? Wow.
Yeah. If it wasn't an already normal anchor in their life, and they're not connected to a person, they're not connected into community, I imagine that there is some spiritual drift occurring. And when I think about leaders and the vision that they can cast, even though the future is still unknown for us, and what this will all mean for us post. And I do believe this is the year that we will be in the post-pandemic church. I believe that.
I'm believing that. My team said to me this morning, "Hey, Carey, that's what you said last year." I'm like, "Oh, let's not get into these. That's what you said last year conversations."
I know, but you and I are eights. We're leaders. We want to define a.
You said that about last fall.
Yeah, right. I didn't say that about last fall, but I am believing that we will start to see pictures of what the post-pandemic
Yeah,
church is.
I
And
agree.
I think leaders are going to have to cast a vision for people of what a spiritual shift back into community and church life can look like.
So do
And
that. Give us your elevator pitch. I would love to hear how you cast vision when we don't know what the future holds. What would you say if I'm saying, but Jeannie, what's next? Like, come on.
yeah, I actually just gave a message to our people in the week in between Christmas and New Year's, and I talked specifically about this and talked about vision. And I of course I'm a preacher, so I had to have some alliteration in there. I had to have some words that started with the same letter. But I talked about how vision is a verb, that it is active. It's not just getting an acquisition. It has to be active. I talked about how vision needs an open vessel, and God is looking for a person to implant a vision into. Vision needs to be visual. We invited every one of our people to pick a word for the year and then to put it around their wrist so that they visually see it for the year, and that it needs to be visceral. It needs to be so big that it can only happen without God. I talked about that. If you can do it without God, it's not a vision, it's just a hustle. And so I really invited our people to step into what the vision we sense is for our church in particular. And some of the things that came out of COVID, you and I were talking about this beforehand. People need the ministry of presence. They need the ministry of shepherding. They need the ministry of hope. And fun fact, Soul City Church was about to launch a $9 million campaign called Ready for More, 10 days out from COVID.
Wow.
And it was including the launch of 2 new churches. We were building out what we're calling the House of Hope and a full studio on site here, so we can release more and more resources. And so obviously we had to pause that. But I sat with that vision and I just said, okay, God, what part of this vision is still alive? What part of this vision do you still want us to take forward? And so we decided we're going to go forward with this House of Hope because people need hope more than ever. And so a portion of our church that isn't being used right now, we're literally reimagining the whole thing. We're recreating it. We're doing a slight renovation. We did a year-end campaign. Carey, we raised the resources before the date was that we were supposed to have them all in.
Yeah,
People are
happens.
hungry,
Wow.
hungry to give to hope. And so I believe churches, if I were to give you my elevator pitch, they need to be houses of hope. They need to be ministry centers. They cannot be centric on a Sunday service.
Yeah.
One of our primary values here at Soul City Church is 7 is greater than 1. We've said it for the last 10 years. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary as a church. And I mean, it's true. It's actual math. It holds. 7 is greater than 1. But what we've said from the very beginning is we want people to know the church is not a 1 day a week service. It's not a 1 hour a week thing that you go and attend and check the box. The body of Christ, the kingdom of God, it's a 7-day a week adventure. And so we're leaning hard into that. And I believe if church leaders are really willing to let go of the come and see mentality, and they really do say, I'm willing to be about go and be, go and make disciples, offer hope. I think that we're going to see our churches, church buildings, church services become ministry centers of care and hope so that people can engage with us, not just on a Sunday for 1 hour throughout the week, but it becomes a center that they can engage with all throughout the week.
Well said. I'm already signing up. So that's incredible.
It's sad. You can tell I'm not passionate about it at all.
How
I need to find some energy.
You are so passionate. It sort of leads to another unscripted question, which is, how have you adjusted to digital preaching? Like you did a really good job there. I'm in. Like what is that like without people in the room? Because that is a reality. And what I want leaders to hear is this is not going away. You
It
will, when
isn't.
we built Connexus 6 years ago, was my last thing I did as a lead pastor. I'm like, I knew more people back then were going to watch the ministry, engage in the ministry,
Yes.
I could say, through
Yes.
the lens of a camera than would be in the room. I didn't know how
Hmm.
true that would be, but like that
Yeah.
was a good guess. And now that is true moving forward. You'll probably always have more people who are in the lens of a camera, watching that way than who are in the room. How have you found that, like just in that studio setting, delivering the message to the production
Yeah.
crew? How's that been for you?
Yeah. I mean, I imagine I'm like almost every other pastor watching or listening to this. The first couple of weeks, I was like, wait, where's Tamara, who always says amen? Like, where's Zoe, who gives me my hallelujahs? Like, whoa, this is different. And I had to really learn a new craft. But, one of the things that I love about you, Carey, and how you offer content to people, you say this on the regular: leaders are learners. And so I've learned how to do it. And one of the things that I will say that I really appreciate about it on this side is 2 weeks in, I was like, all right, I'm done using notes. This doesn't work. You can see when I look down at my notes, we need a teleprompter, and it needs to be a little bit better than just my iPad here. Like, we need a real teleprompter. And so our church invested in it, and I'll never go back. I'll preach from a teleprompter the rest of my life if I
Do you
can.
manuscript or do you bullet point? What do you do?
I manuscript.
Okay.
When I was at Willow, I used to have to send in my messages manuscripted to the lead pastor, and I had to record them into a tape recorder. So I just aged myself. He would listen to them. He would send me notes back, and then I was able to give the message. So I was just trained. I mean,
That's
and
how
that
you
was,
learn. Yeah.
I was 23 years old. Now, I've been doing this craft for, a couple decades. And so I've learned how to force myself to manuscript certain parts, and then other parts, I know where I'm going to go with it.
Yeah.
But I would say to, if we were having a whole other conversation on preaching, I would say to young communicators, learn the art of telling a story, learn the art of creating tension, learn the art of letting people know where you're taking them. And I think that craft really gets honed in forcing yourself to manuscript.
Yeah. And there's something about not having a live audience that I think actually makes you better, because
It
what's
does.
happening is and again, we should do a whole other episode on communicating.
Mm-hmm.
We're pushing time here, but it's very easy just to surf off the energy of the crowd, or
Yeah.
to crash with a thud when there's no energy from the crowd. We've all been there.
Right.
And then all of a
Right.
sudden it's just you and the camera. So I found I'm getting shorter.
Yep.
Humor doesn't work the same way. One of the things, Jeannie, that you bring to the table as a female leader is, being a woman leader. And we have a number listening. There is growing evidence in the corporate world that women bring a different quality of leadership to the C-suite in the corporate world. What would you say some of the unique giftings you've seen, that you're able to bring as a woman, or other women leaders have brought in crisis leadership?
Yeah. Yeah. I love this question, Carey. And, for so many years, I didn't have a lot of counterparts that were also women that sat in this seat. And I'm so happy to see that growing. I'm so happy to see that expanding. And I agree. I've read many of the same articles that point to a lot of evidence that women in the CEO or CFO role really are bringing great gifts to the table. And I think we've all always known that, but obviously there has been some tension in women over the years owning and stepping into those positions. But one of the things that I have really seen, and this does not exclude, I've seen a lot of men that bring these qualities as well, but I would say women bring a distinct ability with these qualities. I think women bring a distinct empathy to the table. I think they bring a distinct emotional intelligence, emotional understanding. Women just naturally can manage lots of complexities. Women are used to holding many different roles at one time. And so I think they can bring some compassion for their players on their team that are also holding many different responsibilities and roles at one time, and everybody kind of got, if you have young kids, my kids are middle school and high school, almost everybody got forced into some kind of multifaceted, I'm a leader and I'm a homeschooler teaching and I'm with my spouse and I'm, making 3 meals a day. Like, whoa, the kitchen is always dirty, right? How do we do all of this? And so I think women really do know how to hold all of the complexities of many roles. I think that women are naturally collaborative and communal, and they prefer to work in relationship. Now, all of those things, I want to underscore and say, I have seen many men that are also really gifted in those characteristics. But I think that's one of the great gifts that women bring to the church. I think it's one of the great gifts that they bring to a leadership culture. And so, and all of those things have been called out of me and then some in this crisis.
Yeah, and that would accord largely with a lot of the research and reports and studies I've seen in places like the Harvard Business Review, et cetera. And I think you can make a really interesting argument, Jeanne, that those are the skills the church needs moving forward, right? That whole idea that content is not just about consumption, it's about connection and community. That idea that we've had Gordon MacDonald has said it, others have said it. We need that priestly function, almost that pastoral function, that empathy and that relational thing, which I think is going to define the church. Because if it's just content, I think you're going to lose the war.
I do too.
I think you're.
I agree. Yep. This summer, I encouraged my whole staff, every single role. I said, every one of us needs to pick up a shepherding responsibility in this church. Wow. I don't care if you're the receptionist. I don't care if you're the production director. Every one of us needs to take on a shepherding role because it's going to grow us. It's going to change us. And we need to then have the experience of coming alongside of people. That's what they're looking for. People are going to be remembered by how they were served and how they experienced the generosity and kindness of the church. They're not going to remember all of the content of our messages.
It's so true. It's that old adage that people are going to remember how you made them feel, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Ignored, shunned, connected, loved, valued, all of those things. We haven't always done a good job of that. And I would be self-critical of that in leadership. Okay, a couple of more rapid fire, but you've indicated, you are the homeschooler / cook / all of that. And you're doing ministry in tandem with your husband, Jared.
Yeah.
And there are a number of leaders listening who are doing the clergy couple thing where it's like, my wife and I, my husband and I lead this together. So for you and Jared, tell me about any unique dynamics that have come to the surface over the last little while in leading together at Soul City.
Yeah, I mean, like any relationship, there's highs and lows, right? And this August, we're going to celebrate 25 years of marriage, which is hard to believe. Thank you. But there's ups and downs. And, I would say one of the real highs, the real ups of having a partner as your co-pastor, there's a shorthand on communication. I can get a sense of what he's thinking and what his decision might be and where he's, being led quickly. There's a shared vision. We started the church together. So, there isn't a tension around vision. There's deep trust. It's just deep trust in the bank. And I would say one of the blessings in COVID is that we were able to carry one another. We were talking about this before we started recording. In our personal lives, we've experienced a lot of loss. Pre-COVID and during COVID. We both lost brothers. I lost a brother in 2019. Jarrett lost his brother at the start of COVID through a stroke, and then his dad passed just in December from COVID. And I have watched the blessing of us being able to really carry one another as co-pastors through that. And so that is one of the great gifts of leading alongside of your spouse and leading alongside of a partner. Some of the downsides, everything's blended. Everything is blended. And, our relationship is like, we just got put into a Vitamix and everything's blended up together, and you can't find the strains of where he starts and where I start and all of those things because we co-parent. we co-minister, we have a marriage, we have all these things. And I would say one of the challenges in all of that was finding even separate space. And you're working from home, you're trying to lead from home, you're trying to help these kids navigate such a major shift in their lives. We have a 12 and a 15-year-old, so it's not like they didn't know what was going on. They felt the impact of COVID. Our son was in 8th grade, didn't have an 8th grade graduation, starting at a new high school, our daughter going into 7th grade. That's a lot to absorb. And so, we felt all of the weightedness of both co-parenting, co-pastoring, and trying to keep our marriage strong and connected and intimate. And we once had a counselor, and I'm a strong believer in marriage counseling, which I love Tony's book, by the way. So
thank you.
To her.
I will let
so
her
good.
know.
It's
so
good.
It just came out. Thanks, Jeannie.
It's so good. We just had a counselor in our lives, a few years ago say, you guys are really, really good at productivity. Are you as good at intimacy? Ooh. And it was like Lord, that is a word from heaven for us. And so we work really hard at, okay, is this marriage more intimate or is it more productive? Like, are we just getting things done?
Because otherwise you're business partners, right?
Totally, exactly. And so we've had to work really hard and really intentional at saying we were married before Soul City Church ever existed. We were married before Elijah and Jeanne Stevens ever existed. And we're gonna be married once we're no longer the pastors of this church. We're gonna be married once our kids, fly the nest and they're on their own. And so, are we valuing intimacy over productivity? And I'd say to any pastor, whether you work with your spouse or not, that is critical for your soul and for their soul.
What has helped with that? What has drawn you closer relationally in terms of intimacy? That's something Tony and I have had to work on too, especially now that I'm working at this full time and she's a published author. There are times we're going on a walk and she's like, hey, I have a question about the podcast next week. And I'm like, no, we're just going to walk. Do you have any hard stops like that? Any other things?
Yeah,
Usually
I think
doing that, but
usually, you named it. Boundaries are huge. Practicing Sabbath is huge. Choosing to have check-in questions with one another. So this is one of the things in our marriage is we just do regular check-ins around how is our communication? How is our nonverbal communication? We do clears. And so we try to, a clear is a 24-hour rule with us. If we have a moment where there was a ding or an ow or I didn't understand what you said when you said that, or I made up this story, that you meant this, we go to one another and we say, hey, I got something to clear. And we try to do it within 24 hours so that it doesn't build up. Because lots of times when you go past 24 hours, it can build up to become something way more than what it was. But, I'll go to Jared and say, hey, I got something to clear with you. And the metaphor is, in marriage, the water can get murky at times. And our goal is to have clear flowing connection and clear flowing communication. And whenever it's not, we will say, hey, I got to clear something with you so that the communication and the connection can run clean instead of it being murky and muddy. And so, for us, it's checking in with each other and it's clears. Those are the two things that we do regularly. And I mean, sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's every couple of days, but those are just little practices that pull us back into connection and into intimacy with one another.
Okay, two more quick questions. Any unique characteristics of being a downtown church? And explain where you are in Chicago for people who know the city, because you're not suburban. This is not Willow. It's not. No. You're inside the loop, correct?
We are. Yeah, we're in the West Loop of Chicago. Oprah is who made us famous many, many years ago. Harpo Studios was right down the street from us. So we like to say that Oprah was the John the Baptist. She prepared the way for Seoul City Church. And so we're in Oprah's old neighborhood. It's an old warehouse district. It's one of the fastest growing neighborhoods in the country. And at one time, a study came out, it had the most amount of millennials living in a neighborhood
Wow.
of any neighborhood in the country. And so it has a lot of young professionals. It's a really dynamic, incredible neighborhood. But yeah, we're right in the city proper. And I would say one of the things that has been real for us is we have had a lot of people that would have never found themselves in an unemployment situation, and they're now in an unemployment situation.
Wow. Yeah.
Lots of frontline workers, essential workers in our church, a wide swath of political convictions, and really helping people through the last, I would say specifically, 6 months to really hear and see from one another. We have a lot of young families, and so how do we support those families has been really critical. And a majority of our kids are not attending schools. And so how do we support these families, that are now navigating all these realities? And then for us, we really stepped in deep, Carey, to the racial injustice conversation. And it's been a conversation that we have been engaged in for the last 10 years, but the temperature turned up significantly. In fact, this summer, we handed over the mic to people of color for the entire month of July. Jarrett and I stepped out of the preaching position, and we gave that over to friends of ours, people of color, to preach for that entire month. Our entire church went through Be the Bridge, Latasha Morrison's book. We had an incredible donor in our church say, I want us to all engage in this, and so I'm going to buy the book for everyone. And I said, okay, you know that like 3,000 people were coming to this church pre-COVID, like on the weekend. And it has expanded way beyond that. Like there's people like in Brazil that call Soul City Church their home. And he's like, I don't care. I want everybody reading this book. And so we bought Be the Bridge for every person that calls Soul City Church their home. And we went through it as a church. Our entire staff went through the book. And so that has been significant for us to be in a major metropolitan city and to really deeply engage ourselves in this work, to name and to claim with pride, we are an anti-racist church. We will always be an anti-racist church, and to really step into what that means for us.
Last question. What are you preaching on in 2021? What do you preach on in 2021?
Right? I mean, how many times did a preacher listening to this have a whole series plan and was like, yep, throw that out. We got to go another direction.
Save that for another year. Yeah,
exactly. We had a lot of those. We just finished a series called On Purpose, and really trying to help people live from a posture of purpose in their relationship with God, in their relationship with their money, in their relationship with their work. We're about to start a series, a 10-week series on the Gospel of Mark. We're going to take our whole church through the Gospel of Mark leading up to Easter. We're going to do a series that I'm really excited about called Everybody Hurts. And we're going to talk about church hurt. We're going to talk about family of origin hurt. We're going to talk about relational hurt. I think all of us had some of those hurts float to the surface in COVID. And so we're going to really go after that. Another series I'm really excited about called The Bigger Table. And we're going to talk about how do we stop living so divided. I mean, Carey, you and I have been around for a while, but I don't know if I've ever remembered a season in my church ministry experience where the church just seemed so polarized and
a high water
so
mark.
divided.
Absolute high water.
It was a high watermark. And so we're going to do a series this year called The Bigger Table and really talk about how do we become people that can hold our differences
so
and
you're
not
going
let
there.
Those differences divide. Oh, we're going there completely.
No, but I hear that in your whole calendar. Like you are just going to address the need under the need.
Yeah, because my intuition, so this is purely my intuition. You guys probably have some facts and some stats around this. I think any of the people that drifted away from the church during COVID, they drifted because the church isn't talking about the things they most want to talk about. The church isn't addressing the issues that are really coming to the surface for them. And so we just said, listen, let's just go there. Let's just go there. Let's talk about the things that people are really talking about, and let's engage a conversation. Let's make a wide and long table so that people feel at home here. I've said this to people. Soul City is a church for the spiritually curious, not the spiritually convinced.
Wow. Okay. Well, that is a fabulous place to probably put a pin in it and say thank you so much for a really great, honest conversation. We could have turned so many of the subjects into podcasts in and of themselves.
This is what you and I do, Carey. We start talking and we can't stop.
That's amazing. Jeanne, thank you so much for joining us on Church Pulse Weekly today.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, my friend.
Well, I hope you found that conversation with Jeanne Stevens as fascinating and riveting as I did. And that's what we try to do around here at Church Pulse Weekly. If you're a new listener, make sure you subscribe. If you enjoyed this, please share it on social. We love to see how it's impacting you, and share it with your team as well. We release a fresh episode every week. I'm going to be having a few episodes with David Kinnaman coming up. Upcoming guests include Rick Warren and others. So we're very excited to bring you what's ahead on Church Pulse Weekly as we navigate this extended crisis together. So if you want more, you can go to barnaaccess.com. We've got resources there for preachers, for leaders, and so much more. A lot of it free. And then there's some premium materials as well for those of you who want to go deeper. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll